A lot of times when I tell people what I do, I'm in HR. Oh, so you hire and fire. That's what people think we do. People who really, really don't know the strategic side of what we do.
Yeah. Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm here with Adam Reidel, Senior People and HR Executive, known for building scalable, compliant, and high-impact HR organizations across fast-growing companies and complex environments. He partners closely with founders and executive teams to align people strategy with business growth, leading enterprise-level transformations across talent, operations, culture, and compliance. Throughout his career, Adam has guided organizations through critical scaling phases, establishing the infrastructure, leadership practices, and operational rigor needed to support sustained expansion. It's good to have you on, Adam.
Great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no worries. And in HR, we say they typically will hire when there's a disaster, and you're needing to come in and be sort of the cleanup person, right?
Yeah.
So when you stepped into companies, what are your first 90-day priorities when you're walking into a broken or let's say immature HR function?
Sure. So for me, the first thing I like to do is understand the reality of that, kind of what's on the ground, what's really going on, kind of as this is the foundation of where we are. So understanding what risk exists, like compliance, misclassification, inconsistent hiring practices. I think knowing all of those things and where you kind of are situated at the very beginning is really, really critical. Also, a piece of that is understanding, how do we make money? How do we generate revenue as an organization? I think that's a missed piece from a lot of my HR colleagues is we jump right into the people side without understanding how the people fit into the organization from a revenue perspective. Then I like to stabilize the core people systems. It certainly includes technology, but also making sure we do have clear policies, consistent hiring practices, leadership clarity on how we make decisions. I think without that, we become reactive chaos, if you will. And then finally, start building out that infrastructure that will support the growth. Workforce planning, performance management frameworks, leadership accountability around talent. I've stepped into an organization, like you said, coming in to clean up messes, but also those who were smart enough to recognize we need to get ahead of this. So came into both, but looking back at one experience in particular, it was coming in and building an people operating system that can support the company's next stage of growth.
So for what I'm hearing is basically going in, doing an audit of seeing what's going on, understanding the business, which you're right, a lot of HR people seem to struggle with or have trouble squaring the circle of that business acumen and so on. But if you're the doctor, let's say, and this is an emergency room of HR, there's legal stuff going on, there's all this, how do you triage what's most important to fix? Because I imagine there's not usually one problem. There's multiple problems compounding. How do you choose what to fix first,
Sure. I mean, I always look at the things that put us at greatest exposure or the greatest risk that might potentially cost us money. Those are always going to be where I will focus first. Are people getting paid? That's great. We don't necessarily need to focus on a big, beautiful new HR system that's maybe going to help prepare for that next stage. It's really, for me, it's focusing on those key areas that present the greatest amount of risk for the organization, whether that risk is a financial risk, a compliance risk, or a people risk. It could be, we're bleeding really, really good people. Why are they leaving? What are the root causes of why we're leaving? I think that's what I focus on, are those high areas of risk for the organization.
So what kind of KPIs are you looking at in your audit process? Just to give us an idea of best practices, I'm looking at retention numbers, what data are you looking at? And if the data is not available,
yeah,
which
oftentimes
is often the case, right?
Yeah. When you're coming into an organization that's trying to scale, that's not a focus for them. So building and understanding, what does success look like from role to role? And what does success look like in some of those, maybe some of those key roles, or in with some of the people that we've been looking. So for me, it's getting beyond what does success look like for me. It's what does success look like at those individual roles and levels, and understanding what's expected of them. How are they being held accountable to them, and to those KPIs, so that we can better diagnose, are we really focusing on the things that matter, and that they're capable of doing, and the things that generate that revenue that we want and that we need to be able to continue to grow and celebrates those growth milestones as we grow.
And how do you overcome because like, put it this way, when you're going to a company and there's established people that have been working the jobs for a while, a new person comes in and they're like, I'm going to look at all the data now. To them, it's like they start to worry about their jobs a little bit. They
Yeah.
start to worry about change. Becomes a transformation project now. And now for them, it's pushback about, well, we never cared about those metrics, or, now you're holding us accountable to metrics we never even thought about before.
Sure.
I mean, how do you know, get the buy-in from, your team that's all new and the greater organization.
So one of the things that I think is important is not going in, as an HR leader, I don't go in thinking, well, applying this was successful at company X, so it's got to work here at company Y. Every company is unique. Every culture is unique. So trying to apply those same processes, those same KPIs, those same metrics never works. You're going to fall flat. You're going to lose all credibility. It's understanding what truly does matter to the organization, to the individual, to the different positions. When we diagnose that, we understand that, then we can start building things that matter to those individuals. That's where you create that buy-in. That's where you get that level of engagement that you need for the company to be successful, and for those individuals to be successful and understand kind of their skin in the game. What's in it for me? When they understand where they kind of fit into the organization, the more successful they're going to be, the more successful the organization is going to be.
No, it makes sense. And obviously working with them to want to be your allies in this transformation that's going to occur is important, because,
Sure.
we always hear the pushback of like, oh, we've always done it this way,
Exactly.
that kind of stuff.
And that's never lost on me. I mean, companies grow and become successful for intentionally. It doesn't happen. I mean, there's always happy accidents, but I think HR needs to keep in mind what has made them successful, and not losing sight of that. You could certainly build on that, but don't ever lose sight of what has made them successful up until that point.
And where do you think a lot of these like high growth companies are getting it wrong in terms of like infrastructure and so on?
I think one of the things I saw in a past life, if you will, is thinking that HR is something you build after you scale. When I think the reality is it's something that enables scale. Founders are so laser focused on product and revenue early on, as they should be. But without that people infrastructure, I think you start to see some predictable problems. You have inconsistencies with your hiring, a lot of lack of clarity when it comes to accountability, compensation inequity, and cultural fragmentation. I think, although, when you look at hiring, that's where that cultural fragmentation can happen. And I think there can be an over-reliance on informal decision-making. When you're 5, 10, 15 people, it's really easy to get everybody in a room, whether, a Zoom or whatever, or in a physical room, to make decisions. But that starts to break down when you scale in 50, 60, 100 people. So you really do need to put a little bit more formality around that. I think companies that scale successfully usually make one key shift. They treat people strategy as part of operational infrastructure, just like any other function, whether it's finance, marketing, technology.
That makes sense. And, just thinking about, um, these, it is a common problem. You're right. In terms of like startups overlooking HR, it's becomes an afterthought until there's like a legal issue. And then all of a sudden, oh no, we need to hire someone to come in to handle this. Right.
Yeah.
And it, it's always again, using the doctor analogy, if you're doing preemptive preventative medicine, then you're avoiding issues later on.
Sure.
One example I can give is the compensation side, right? So you're paying people willy nilly. Everyone's negotiating their own comp package. There's no scales and so on. In the beginning, whatever. Later on, all those people, now you're bringing new people in, and the new people, you're like, oh, we're going to have to pay them more. And then it creates a payment disparity of like, well, all your existing team is looking at the new person starting, getting paid
Sure.
more than they are. They're all going to talk. This happened to my friend working at the bank. He worked there 5 years. The new people getting hired were getting paid, 10 grand more than he was. He's like, I've been here working hard, morale destroyed, right?
Absolutely.
And a
Yeah.
lot of times, from what I've seen, companies are not wanting to go back and retroactively give everyone a raise, because now you're looking at, oh, we got 100 people we got to give a raise to bring to parity with the market, because there was no strategy in terms of what percentile employer they would be. They just paid people whatever they could,
Sure.
and they never thought about a strategy of like, look, we're going to be a 70th percentile employer, 80th percentile employer. And for those that don't know what that means, it means you line up 100 companies, you want to be in the top 20, which means you're an 80th percentile.
Yeah.
You're.
I mean, salary compression
Yeah.
is a real thing. It's how you react to it and how you decide it organizationally, how that fits into your organization. I think, like you say, when you set up structures that naturally make you competitive and fair in your practices and equitable in your practices, a lot of that the concerns with morale kind of don't necessarily disappear, but they dissipate to a degree,
Yeah.
because people do feel they're in an environment where they are treated fairly, they are paid fairly. It's it's something you can set up once and it's done. It's something that you need to dust off regularly. Make sure you are maintaining your competitive edge when it comes to total rewards as a whole, to
Yeah.
make sure that you aren't losing sight of those people who have built you up to be successful so far.
It can be tricky, especially with like an inflationary economy like we are now, where
Yeah.
prices and salaries are, I mean, during COVID, it was wild with the kind of salaries we were seeing. Now things have kind of stagnated for a little bit, but you have to review comp often, it
All
seems.
the
I
time.
mean, you can't just wait once a year or something.
It can't be. I mean, the market really does help. I mean, the market tells you whether or not you are being competitive when you're talking to candidates. And especially an organization like I'm in now, we're a remote organization. So we cast a fairly wide net. And so we're getting really a pulse for not just, local to Southwest Florida where we're headquartered, but what is the national sentiment when it comes to comp, and really getting a really big picture now that has really informed our comp strategy.
I guess it all ties into, how you view HR, right? Whether you view it as a admin function or as an
Absolutely.
actual like a growth lever, which
Absolutely.
depends who you ask.
It
I've
does.
talked to a lot of people that are like, oh, it's a burden. It's an admin function. We'll do when we have to, the minimum we have to. For others, larger companies that sort of get it, let's say, they're, oh no, HR is always at the table because they're helping in so many ways to help us grow our company. It's a people business, and
It's funny because I was reading something the other day about how HR is always seems to be rebranding itself. I'm old
yeah,
enough to remember when it was called personnel and then HR and people ops. And I think they've all had their place. And in many ways, they all kind of still coexist. I think the function itself has evolved because people evolve, the needs change, the organizational needs change. And we've, I think we've done a good job, not a great job, but a good job evolving with the changing times.
so I think part of that is making sure that you're a business advisor, right, in a company, and like partnering with leadership. So
Yes.
how do you go about that, and how do you, like, have you ever had a situation where you've been viewed as admin and you're like, no, I'm an advisor, and let me get you on my side in terms of how things work?
Yeah, I was in a lot of times when I tell people what I do, "Oh, I'm in HR." Oh, so you hire and fire. That's what people think we do. People who really, really don't know the strategic side of what we do,
Yeah.
that's what we do. And years ago, I mean, it was a little earlier in my career, but still, I was still far enough along where I was beyond processing, transactional things. And I had a regional VP who viewed HR as that tactical piece that was there when you need them, but stay out of my way when I don't. And just didn't really see the value of what we could do. And then to turn that relationship around, it was one of the, I was in a position where I had to prove it. I had to prove the value, not just of what I could do and what I could bring, but what HR was really, really capable of doing. And it was partnering with him on more. It was a multi-site kind of company and multinational, multi-state, all of that. So accompanying him on site visits so that he would maybe start to see the business through a different lens and through a people lens. We had some very high revenue generating locations, but we were still struggling with the people side of things. And when he and I finally started to work a little bit closer together on diagnosing that, he started to see the value in what we could do together and really valued that partnership a lot more than when I initially started working with him.
Well, it takes time to build the trust, I think, for sure. They need to know that you know the business. And I think that's definitely something we see in, let's say, the best HR people we've placed have been ones that understand the people side of things, but can speak the language of the CFO and the
Absolutely.
COO. They understand the business metrics. They know what's going on in the business, and they're viewed as a peer rather than, oh, they're just in HR, and which can often be the case for a lot of these finance people. They're just like, you're in your social, like your HR land or whatever, with people and Care Bears and all these
Yeah, it's
things. And,
a whole
you
lot
know,
of fluff and not a lot of substance is how I
exactly.
always looked at
And
it. And,
so
you know,
having that substance is important, right?
it is. I think, I've always been a little bit leery when I see the reporting structure of having HR report into finance. And to me, that's always been a signal that they're looked at strictly as overhead and there
Yeah.
because we need them. We need, make sure we're compliant and we're risk averse. So we have to do this,
Yeah.
not because they see the value in it. So I've always been, I've always seen that as a bit of a red flag.
Well, for many HR leaders, when they're interviewing and we're placing them in front of a company, that's one of the key things that we ask the company is, who are they reporting to?
Yeah.
'Cause I can tell them right off the bat whether they're going to have an issue hiring or not is based on the reporting structure. Like, if you
Agreed.
hire a senior HR leader, they want direct access to the CEO. I mean, they do. They want a seat
Agreed.
at the table, right? You want to be able to build just like everybody else. And if they feel sort of like, I'm being going to be hamstrung by, and then it becomes combative, where it's like,
It
oh,
does.
one hand it's the finance person's the bean counter, and the other one's you're the fluffy one. It's like, well, now you created a combative environment rather than a team where we're all equals at the table.
Yeah. You
So
become another bean to count. That's really what you become.
yeah.
There's really not the value of what we can do in our profession. Just it's not as appreciated or as visible in the organization when it's structured that way, in my opinion and in my
So what
experience.
can people do, like, just from the outside in, looking at that kind of structure, or you're at the company, you're trying to move, like, what can you do to sort of help move the needle a little bit with that,
Yeah, I
because
think we all come in. You come in with a body of experience, right? I mean, these
yeah,
organizations don't hire you because you're not coming with something. I think that's good experience, and you need to rely on it to a degree. I said earlier, don't come in thinking what you did at company X is necessarily going to apply at company Y. But if you are able to come in and demonstrate, if we do X, we are going to see Y result because this is what historical data does show us, and this is what some of the better organizations are doing. Whether they're similarly situated or not, I think if you're able to present, finance, IT, your other business partners, like me and like HR, we love data, but data only matters when it's really truly telling a story. So I think when you're in that kind of structure and you want to get things that are meaningful done and not just be focused on did somebody get their I-9 completed, it's demonstrating the value that you've experienced by doing something that fosters engagement, that fosters career growth for individuals. Because when you put all that together, you really are helping with organizational growth and strategy.
that makes sense. And you've been at a lot of these hyper growth companies, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's one of the things I've seen for a lot of companies is they grow too fast
Yeah.
and everything breaks because it didn't have systems in place to really like, it was all patchwork kind of, everything was just like ad hoc or, you know, figure it out as you go, build the plane as it's flying kind of thing.
Yes.
And in these hyper growth companies, like how do you grow maintaining, without culture falling apart? Because it's one thing when the CEO is managing a team of 10 people and everyone is directly working with him and or her, and they know everybody and so on. But when you get scaled to 100 people in 3 months or whatever, how do you grow keeping quality control and compliance, and then keeping the culture? Because it's like bringing in thousands of people or whatever very quickly. It's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah. And I think, culture matters. I mean,
Yeah.
especially to a founder. And I often think I've observed that, founders get concerned that standardization and even consistency can be culture killers. So I think this is a really good question because of that worry. But I think the reality is that structure really protects culture, especially as you're growing. I mean, culture to me is built on the behaviors you tolerate, right? So early on, really are setting that tone of what your resilience level is and what you will accept in terms of behaviors from people. And generally, when founders get it right, they only accept the best behaviors, right? That's what's going to help with that explosive growth. So I think if you've been scaling your company so far with that in mind, the key is to standardize principles rather than managing or micromanaging behaviors. So for example, you can standardize hiring processes, leadership expectations, clarity, values, all of those things, but still have that degree of flexibility in how people operate. So, people will perform better working 10 to 7 versus 8 to 5, and there's no real disruption to the business. Who cares? You're still allowing that flexibility, but still standardizing your approaches and your infrastructure. It's getting beyond looking at standardization and consistency as a bureaucracy, but focusing it more on clarity and consistency. And I think when people understand kind of the rules of the game, culture actually becomes a little bit stronger because I think people are more appreciative of it because they understand their role and how they fit into the organization and kind of the history behind it and how they've become successful.
And so, what kind of compliance risks do you see from like a company, let's say that's local, under 50 employees, then you go to 100 global,
Yeah,
like there's obviously these compliance risks going global, there's other kinds of risks as well when you're scaling that fast. Like there's got to be certain things that you're like looking for, is there?
sure. So I worked in an organization, so it was a startup. It was an amazing experience, and we were a remote first company, so we had employees from coast to coast. So even when you think about that, how the compliance risks vary even from state to state and territory to territory in the United States, and then you grow globally. I think the biggest risk is assuming you can apply what you've been doing, locally on a global scale. You can't. Um, Everything differs. I mean, we know it differs from state to state. It differs from country to country too, and recognizing that. And I've always been honest, with my leadership, my CEO, and I'm good and I'm great at a lot of things, but I don't know everything globally. I just don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to do that. So just making sure we're being very deliberate and understanding what might be some of the risks, when it comes to worker classification, availability of labor, making sure you're doing those labor studies before you even go global to make sure that in your industry and what you're trying to do and build, that availability of labor is present where you're trying to grow. Understanding termination protections and benefit requirements, tax regulations, all of these things are things that I think I've seen organizations just go into a country and try to apply the approach that's been successful in the United States and replicate it offshore, and it never works. It never works.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on the brunt of that before, working for in Canada, an American company, and seeing them really fall flat on their face a few times over employment law, from firing people to we don't have the idea of at will employment, for example. Things like that are just that's an American thing.
That is it's such a uniquely United States thing. And another
Mhm.
thing I think, not necessarily HR related, is how do you get money out of a country? When it comes to the revenues that you generate, if you're a manufacturing organization or you're selling organization in
Yeah.
different countries, the money might be there, but how do you get it? How are you able to use it to continue to build your organization? These are all things, and that you need to come in with a very solid plan and people who understand this and have done it. So, like I say, I'll always raise my hand and say, I don't know how to do this, but we need somebody. So we need to make sure we're getting somebody who does.
So in those cases where you're expanding globally, are you getting a local consultant from the country to sort of support on the HR side or with compliance matters or
Sure.
yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's legal, whether it's an HR resource, whether it's an IT resource, a finance resource, um, if you're going to deliberately build out in another country, you need to be very smart and very intentional about it, and make sure you have a degree of expertise, or at least the if not your own, at least have the ability to get the access to expertise when it comes to certain things, whether it's HR,
Yeah.
whether it's legal, whether it's operations. Making sure you have that resource availability is critical.
I guess it comes down to having some curiosity and not just making assumptions, right?
Sure.
So that's
Absolutely.
a big part of it.
You have to go in assuming everything you know about what you've been doing from a compliance and risk perspective in the US doesn't apply, because it generally won't. There can definitely be a lot of similarities, but the devil's always in the details in how they get from soup to nuts in other countries. And it's always vastly different.
So for best practice, let's say you want to go into a new country, like is there a ramp time that you like to normally tell the founder of like, listen, before we just go in and start hiring people, give us what, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to prep or
Yeah, usually about 90 days, and understand what it takes to build a company in another country. I mean, there's countries where there's statutory waiting requirements before you can even become a company. You have to have certain levels of leadership physically based in that country before you can even begin operations. Really allow for that meaningful period of time to understand the requirements, understand the risks, and understand that you have great people. You have great people who have made you successful, but understand that they might be great in one aspect, but the global expansion piece might not be something that they have that skill set. It's not that they can't learn it, but recognize that early on, that there's a ton of risk when you decide to expand globally.
well, again, a thoughtful approach and taking the time to, as you said, the devil's in the details, right? So it totally makes
Absolutely.
sense. Is there any other things that you think like standardized policies? How do you go from a founder led small group to like, and we call it corporatizing it, right? Like creating standardized policies, standardized pay scales, all these kinds of corporate kind of structures. Um, how do you do that with a founder led business where, the company is kind of stuck in its ways? We see this a lot with family offices
Yeah.
where the family office is like, oh, we just, we do things, it's a family, whatever. And then you're growing, and now next thing you know, oh, we're at 500 headcount and there's no standardized policies and so on. So like that, you need to buy in from the family or the ownership or the founder led company.
Yeah.
Like how do you do that?
So I think that's kind of like figuring it out later, right? And
Mhm.
I think the cost shows up in ways that maybe the family or the founder or the company in general, that they might not anticipate. You're going to see higher turnover. You're going to see inconsistencies with leadership, quality, pay inequities, like we talked about, a lot of compliance risk, conflict between people about roles and accountability. And by the time these things really start to bubble up to the surface and become visible to senior leadership, it's two things. They're expensive and disruptive, and they're expensive and disruptive to fix. So I think when you invest in people infrastructure early, it's not about slowing growth. I think it's about preventing growth from breaking the organization, not beyond just repair, but
Mhm.
again, back to the being expensive and disruptive to do it. So I think, again, investing early on in that infrastructure, that people infrastructure, is critical.
But you also need like, you know, I would say not only buy-in, but they'll say that the blessing of leadership to be able to enact this, right?
Sure.
And for them, if it's a founder led or a family run business, there's probably a lot of things that cause problems, from nepotism to,
Oh, absolutely.
usually a lot of that, my cousin's working in this department, my mother-in-law's there, and, but then they grow and now it becomes an issue because for the staff, they see that sort of like conflict of interest that, and that VP just got his role because he's the cousin of the,
Sure.
of so on. Um, so how do you corporatize when you have that? I mean, that seems
Yeah.
like almost like you have to clean house to a certain extent to get culture back on track.
Yeah, I think so. In that particular environment, often, when it's a family-owned, family-led organization, often there's a charter. There's a family charter that spells out kind of the rules for the family. Only a certain amount for sibling, can, they're only a certain amount of their kids can work. They have this structure in place. If they don't, they need it because that really does become kind of the rights of the family moving forward. So, and being very transparent about it as an organization that yes, we are family owned, we're family led. There are family members who their names on the building, so they're involved in the organization. But when you're able to be transparent to a degree to the entire organization about what that really looks like and what that means, I think some of, not all, but some of that, oh, Johnny only got the job because
Yeah.
he's the owner's son or the owner's brother-in-law. I think some of that goes away when they understand the structure behind it. But there also needs to be, again, we've talked a lot about intentionality. There needs to be that behind it as well. So it's fine to hire a brother-in-law for your VP of sales if they have the background to be a VP of sales.
Yeah.
And not just placing somebody as sort of that brother-in-law job. So there can be a lot of conflict, and there can be a lot of resistance from employees accepting things at face value when they come from the organization because perception is reality for people. So
Yeah.
whatever they have, without absent and information, they're going to create their own narrative of how things come about and how things go from nothing to something. So it's best as an organization to be in front of it, and I think that CEO HR partnership is critical when it comes to being able to communicate that out effectively.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a learning curve for everyone involved in terms of how they're going to not look like there's favoritism going on and everything else, and sort of cleaning that up can take time. I've definitely talked to people that worked at family run businesses and family led businesses where people have left. A lot of good people leave because
They
they
do.
feel like it's they're kind of stuck where they can't complain about someone because the other person's a family member. It's like it's creating a lot of murky gray area for to navigate.
It is. I mean, a lot of people will stay silent and leave because they don't feel that the environment or the organizational culture allows for um, it's not a culture of feedback. And if it is, it's not a culture of feedback where that feedback turns into action.
Yeah.
And I see that particularly in family owned, family led organizations. I worked in one and I loved it. But even as the HR leader, often my hands were tied in terms of what I was able to actually execute when it came to legitimate concerns and issues that came up with family members.
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, it is what it is. It's I guess for long-term growth, they're going to have to corporatize at some point. It's
Absolutely.
inevitable because you get to the point where you need to bring in outside people and outside leadership, and
Absolutely. And I think we've seen that. We've seen a lot of family owned companies that have grown exponentially and are very well known brands and their products that we see on the shelves when we go into stores
yeah.
who recognized that family can only grow you so far. And, the succession line can only, for, your top leadership positions can only go down so far to your family. And when that doesn't exist, the smart ones have recognized that and brought in outside leadership. It happened at the family owned company that I worked at. They recognized that for the company to sustain beyond when the CEO left the organization, there was nobody from a family succession perspective that was ready to take the reins. They knew that, they brought somebody in, and the company continues to be a success today as a result of that honest look at the health of the organization.
No, it totally makes sense. On another topic here, and it's funny because we were discussing sort of like, diversity, equity, inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
belonging. Um, that's a bit of a hot topic, I'd say, just because, it seems this year the equity piece has been struck down by the courts, over the Harvard decision. For people
Mm-hmm.
that don't know, Asian students were complaining that there was discrimination against them because of scoring and quotas that they found in terms of African American students getting in. And I guess that gained traction because it was one minority group complaining about another minority group getting let's say, push forward, right?
Sure.
And I guess that's kind of the issue. It's always been, whether it was affirmative action or equity and inclusion, is if there's only so many zero sum game, there's only so many roles and positions in the universities or jobs, and so many people, and there are winners and losers, and so
Sure.
who gets to choose that, and so on, let the courts decide that. That's not up for us to decide today. But I find a lot of companies, a few years ago, were all about DE&I. It was say, push very hard in the
Mm-hmm.
culture, push very hard with companies. Now it seems like there's been a big step back in certain areas. I'd say there's still inclusion, I think, is still going on. People are talking now about neurodiversity more because that's sort of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
viewed as safe, let's say. And we saw with COVID, just to give you sort of like the preamble, like we saw with COVID, people working remotely. So a lot of people that had neurodiverse or had like introverts, for example, found, working remotely is a lot better for me.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I'm enjoying work, and so now we're in 2026.
Yeah.
You know, where do you see sort of DE and I and B, or whatever you want to rebrand it as?
Yeah.
Where's the future of this going, and how do you create systems that aren't going to, like, create legal issues for you now?
Sure.
Because you know,
So it's been an interesting, I think, 6 years, right?
oh
I
yeah,
look at the murder of George Floyd changed a lot of organizations and what they wanted to do or what they felt they needed to do. And
yeah,
I've been really reflective about that in the last, what is it, 12, 13, 14 months, whatever it is, and whether or not that reaction was performative or genuine.
yeah.
And I like to think more the latter. My heart does. I don't know necessarily my brain's caught up to my heart, but I think a lot of those initiatives failed because they were programmatic and not part of the organizational structure and systems. I think organizations launch training sessions or campaigns and these employee resource groups and all these different things, but they really didn't change the underlying processes or things that shape hiring and promotion and leadership development. I still think there's a lot of room for DEIB. And I think the real impact happens when those principles are embedded into those core systems and how people are recruited and how performance is evaluated and how leaders are held accountable. And I think the most effective approach that I've seen is when it's made into those decision-making structures. For example, structured interviews help reduce bias in hiring. Transparent promotion criteria can improve equity in career advancement. Leadership development programs can intentionally broaden representation in senior roles. So I think like everything, I think there needs to be an evolution, and we need to move beyond a stark event that was triggering for a lot of us into how do we take that spirit into the actual decision-making processes that exist in an organization. I think when these practices become part of the operating model, D&I stops becoming separate initiative and just becomes part of how the company functions. And it's no longer what I think a lot of certain people or a lot of, certain people might think of DEIB as affirmative action and things like that, that were more legal precedent than anything else. And they look at it as just being a part of how we operate.
I think, just from what I'm hearing, is basically, if you have a clear, consistent hiring practice where you're being exhaustive in your search and your hiring, you're going to get diversity because you're looking everywhere for candidates, right?
Yeah, I think I won't say that it just happens naturally.
Yeah.
There has to be. I mean, again, that word that I think we both used a few times, that intentionality behind it. You have to want to do it too, right? You have to want to cast that wider net when it comes to whether it's hiring or promotion or learning opportunities and career advancement. And I think when you do, you're very clear in what the expectations are when it comes to the decision making. Um, it happens, if not naturally, a lot more organically than it might be when you don't have things that are more systematic in place.
I think the pushback that I often hear is people worried that we're eliminating meritocracy, you know, and that's usually the pushback you hear from people is, there's if there's a quota in place, or there's some kind of, people are not trusting the system in terms of
Sure,
like how things are being done. You know, in Harvard, for example, there was a bit of it looked like there was either a quota or some kind of, you
sure.
know, some kind of bias in terms of, making sure certain groups got through. But in day to day for most companies, I mean, you know, there's a lot of unconscious biases that everyone has, and
All of us have one.
I've posted about this in length on LinkedIn about, all these different biases. And it was actually a learning experience for me. Like there's so many biases. It's not just race. It's like from, your, like, not to list them all, but there's a lot of biases people have. Let's just say like 20, 30 different types of them. The one that we see most of all now, I'd say in hiring, executive hiring, is ageism, which is the
Absolutely.
ism that seems to really be prevalent for a lot of people. Often, I can tell you, not to name names, but I've heard in many interviews with clients where, oh, they're too old, you know, just, if they're over 45, a lot of people not wanting to hire them. It just
Yeah.
straight up discrimination.
I think you
So
probably hear it in what you do a lot of, oh, they're overqualified.
that's another buzzword they'll say. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Let's
another,
just say
oh,
they're
they're
old.
overqualified, or I don't think they have enough vigor. They don't look like they want to roll up their sleeves. There's all sorts of things
There's
we hear often. It's the
And it's
so
going to be interesting. So you brought up a couple things um, that I hear, and the first is quotas. I've never been, when it comes to this area of DEIB, quotas are a number that I mean, don't chase a number, chase improvement, chase equity, chase fairness and availability, chase all those things. Chase transparency. And I think when you do those things, those are what create that equitable environment, that inclusive environment, that sense of belonging, where everybody understands what it does take to get from here to here. And I think you bring up ageism. I think we're going to see a lot of claims about this, and we're going to read a lot more about this because we're in a really, really interesting generational juxtaposition, if you will, where we still have boomers working. I mean, my mom is going to be 80 next year, and she's still working, and she's working alongside, I don't know, is it Gen Alpha or whatever it is that's now starting to enter the workforce. So we have boomers, but we also who are butting up against maybe retirement, but are still actively working, still want to be challenged, still want to grow. But
yeah.
then you have your Gen Xers who are wanting to do the same things, who are on Gen Xers. So we have all of these people kind of competing right now, and we're all aging. And I think that's going to be an area that we hear a lot about, just like you mentioned neurodiversity. I'll be honest, I never even heard that term until COVID and the
Yeah.
world went remote. It was just not a term I was familiar with. I made sure to get educated about it, understand it, so I could be better in what I do to appreciate it and know what it might mean and the variations of it. So that was, and it's still, I mean, it's still something that we need to be aware of. But I think that idea of ageism and being overqualified or they will get bored are things we need to be listening to and being very aware of because it's very, very real.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the hiring issues, I think neurodiversity and ageism probably the most prevalent that I see. You know,
Yeah.
and I've been in recruiting for close to 20 years now.
Yeah.
I can count on my hand the number of times I've seen any kind of racism, let's say, in hiring. But when it comes to ageism, it's like often. It's very often.
I
So,
being in HR for about 25 years, it's, early in your career, you don't really see it. But as you grow in your career, and I think it's just something that is happening a lot more recently, just because of market conditions, the kind of these generations starting to collide as well. It's a lot, people are being a lot more vocal about it, which I think is great.
yeah,
And that it's becoming a topic that we need to recognize it and know that it does exist. And I think organizations need to be better about all of that so that they
yeah.
can make better and more informed decisions about how they move forward.
Well, in mental health, especially, I don't think we really started talking about mental health until
Yeah.
COVID, where we all went crazy. So, like, I'm still seeing the effects with a lot of people of that isolation and, you know, that kind of just, yeah, the difficulty of COVID and the lockdown, what it did to people's mental health, and
Yeah. Yeah.
all the kids that a whole generation of kids that lost their high school and so on
They
with
lost a
COVID.
huge,
That's affecting how they socialize and everything else. Like, that's good. They're going to be entering the workforce, and they're like, you know, uh, how would you say, they're relationally stunted or whatever. They're
they
they're
are.
having issues with how to relate to people. Oh, I'm not, when you tell people like pick up the phone and call them, oh, I'll just text them. It's like, no, well, things
It,
like that you think are small, but they add up, right?
they do. So, I mean, just a quick story. I remember when March 17th, I can remember that day, is the date my company at the time went fully remote. We gave people about 30 minutes to grab what they needed out of their offices and get home. So that was kind of step one. But, and I was in a kind of a unique position. I just relocated to Florida, but my family stayed back in the Chicago area while our house was selling, etc. So not only was I in a new job, I was in a new state, I was alone and sitting in corporate housing, and people recognized that other people might not have that family infrastructure around them, and we're very good about reaching out to them. And maybe we couldn't go grab lunch or a beer, but setting up a Zoom just to chat with somebody and make
Yeah.
sure they're doing okay. I mean, I did daily check-ins with each member of my team through, virtually, just to check in and make sure they're doing okay and that their families are doing okay. It was a very unique time, but mental health continues to be something that we need to talk about. I look back in history, and again, it seems like it's a topic that we've only started talking about more recently. But one of the things that I found interesting when Rosalind Carter died, I was born when that presidency was going on, but I was born. I didn't necessarily live it. And to understand her commitment to that, and getting a national conversation going about mental health in the 1970s. And I don't know that anybody really took her seriously. And she recognized it so long ago, and I'm sure
Yeah.
there were others before her, just how important it is. And it continues to be something really important to me, and I think a lot of it happened because of COVID, that we need to be good to each other, and we need to have conversations that really help us understand everybody has a story to tell, and everybody's going through things that we can never understand and will never experience, and be appreciative of that, even if we can't understand it, and continue to talk about resources and tools that are available to people that can help them. I think we still need to be very vocal about that as well.
Well, it's getting better. I think people, he said to most people, like my parents' generation and stuff, talking about anything mental health you never talk about it, right? And now people are a lot more open. Some would say people are a little bit too open. You go on Instagram, people are crying and recording videos and posting them. So that's a whole other thing, right?
That's a different topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we're evolving as a society where it's becoming now less taboo to discuss your mental health, and
Yeah.
that's helping with just creating that openness and so on, and obviously that's part of the culture of the company. If people are open to say, hey, I'm having a bad day, I'm going to take a day or a weekend
Mhm.
or extended weekend to relax and come back, things like that when needed.
Yeah. I think, and I think it really matters when there's visibility of people that you respect talking about it. For instance, I was with an organization a few years ago, and we had a CEO who's, was my boss, and now he's just a good friend, who was
Mhm.
very open about the importance of mental health, and getting, having that resource or that person to talk to when you need them, how important and critical that was to him. And when he was vocal about it and shared a bit of his journey, it really did break down for other people kind of these walls that maybe they'd put up to that were kind of preservation mode and self-preservation mode. It's so impactful when people are open to sharing, to a degree, their journey and their experiences, and that there's no shame in it, and um, that that professionals exist for a reason.
Yeah, it makes sense. And things are getting better, I'd say, for sure in that space. Last thing I wanted to ask you, just because I think this would be beneficial to a lot of HR folks right now looking for work, in your career, you've been able to jump around between industries with some, I'll say, some ease in the sense. How are you been able to leave, like, let's say go from tech to now in supplements and so on? Like, how
Yeah,
have you been able to move around between industries, still practicing HR, where for a lot of other HR people, they're maybe having difficulty. There's barriers to
yeah,
entry, right? So
there
a
are.
good one is like healthcare. To get into healthcare, it's like almost impossible for a lot of people because, well, you don't have healthcare experience. We
We
can't
don't want
hire
it.
you and so
Yeah,
on, right?
yeah.
What would you say to people that are in HR right now, tough HR job market, trying to change, maybe pivot industries because they see opportunities there and so on? Like, what did you do and what can they do to?
Yeah. So I think, so first, I know, I mean, I know that this is I've never seen, I mean, like you said, you've been doing what you do for 20 years. I've been through, I survived, 2008, 2009 in that market. And this is just such a unique time. And so I hear these stories and I see these stories, and, I understand it's a difficult time, to make changes or to find something and to break into something new. So my success was if I saw a role that was at least compelling, I would first see who I knew. Did I know somebody who was connected to or connected to somebody who was connected to somebody that could get me in front of the hiring manager or the hiring team? But if I found a company in a role that I was truly invested in and really was driven to be a part of that organization, I learned as much as I could. There's so much out there. We have more tools now at our fingertips than we've ever had. So learn absolutely everything you can about the organization. I cannot stress enough, if you're looking to go from one organization that maybe you've been, or one industry that you've been in for 10, 15 years and pivot to a new one, how organizations make money is so different organization to organization, but industry to industry. And so really understanding how revenue is generated, I think, is important, because when you can talk to that in HR, you're proving your investment in the organization and you're able to tie in people strategy into that. Just learn, have conversations, talk to people who currently work at that organization, understand how they've been successful, made them successful in getting into the organization. I tell everybody that comes to me with questions about their job search and everything is there is no job search jail. So don't get to the point of being irritating, and certainly don't break any laws when you're doing things, but talk to people, find people. There's the worst that you can happen is getting a note from a CEO that I'm not interested in you, you're not a fit, or they don't reply at all. Never know unless you hit that send button. So just, attack it on all fronts. But I think you really need to understand the organization, how it started, how it's been, what has made it successful, and tying the value that you bring into future success.
Yeah, and on the research part, I mean, with AI, doing research in the industry and company is that much easier.
It's so much easier. I mean, you can get names of individuals. You can learn people who may have been in the same role that's now being posted. So you know who to go to. Why did you leave this job? Why, what made you stay before? All these different things that you can ask these people. Is so easy to find out this information now. I mean, AI is great, and I'm a huge adopter of it. I say I'm in that curious stage still and becoming more experienced with it, but it's never going to replace that people experience. So find those people who are living or have lived the experience of an organization that you're interested in, and you'll generally get honest, professional feedback. And if you're getting unfiltered negative company bashing feedback, take that with a grain of salt, because there's usually more to that story. But technology is great, like I said, but don't let that replace that human experience that people have lived through. So you can really, really understand the organization through their lens, because when you get that, you're able to start seeing whether or not it truly is a good fit, and if it's worth continuing your investment in the research into the organization and everything.
No, it totally makes sense, and appreciate that advice. I'm sure some of our HR leaders that are looking for work are going to get some benefit from that. Really appreciate having you on today. It was a great chat.
No, I enjoyed this. I love talking about what I do and what my counterparts do across the globe. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this with me.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.